Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we're speaking with Reka, head of community at RISC Zero, about the state of zero-knowledge infrastructure, strategies for executing a successful go-to-market for protocols, and why she decided to pivot from being a founder to work at an existing project. Reka was previously on Rehash all the way back in Season 4, Episode 1, which aired 2 years ago, in a joint conversation with LDF about the state of the creator economy and what it meant to create content worth collecting. Since then, she's transitioned into an advisory role at Guild, built a new company, spent a year doing deep research into intense and zero-knowledge infrastructure, and started a new job at RISC Zero. She fills us in on all of that, and then we spend the majority of the episode talking about why ZK has permeated into almost every corner of blockchain, and her best strategies and advice for creating and executing a successful go-to-market campaign for protocols. This episode is quite different from the last one I recorded with Reka, so if you want to hear more about her background as a veterinarian or her thoughts on the creator economy, I would highly recommend going back and listening to Season 4, Episode 1 from February 16th, 2023, which you can find on YouTube or any podcast streaming platform. Also, don't forget to hop into our Telegram chat at t.me/rehashweb3 to stay up to date on all things Rehash and be the first to know what we're getting up to at ETH Denver in a couple of weeks and where you can come watch one of our upcoming shows. Thanks as always for listening, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Reka. Reka, I'm so excited to have you back on Rehash. This is your second time on Rehash, but your first solo appearance. The first time you were on Rehash was with LDF all the way back in Season 4, Episode 1. We're now at Season 11. And so it's been a while. I think that aired on, let me just double check. Yeah, February 16th, 2023. So we're coming up on almost exactly 2 years since then. So to start us off, could you just update us on what you've been up to over the last 2 years?
My hair got shorter.
I love it. It looks super cute. You've got like the Princess Diana look.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that was really funny. Kind of came out of Bangkok, the protocol's princess now because of the hair.
I love it. I love it.
So what I've been up to. Also, thank you so much for having me back. And thank you for the Rehash community that they voted me back on, being back on. I do have some updates. So it's been like a good tenure of the 2 years to come back and like say what's up. So wow, since then, oh my goodness. Well, Guild, I'm an advisor now. That happened a year and a half ago-ish, a little bit less. And then all last year, I was mostly I was consulting for a while, but I was also diving into infrastructure. And how that happened, we can get into that later as well. But I've always been driven by impact and how I chose my careers for even turning into blockchain from being a veterinarian, and all these decisions in my life were all driven by curiosity, passion, and impact. So I felt like I needed to be further down the stack, and automations have always been huge for me. And somehow I found myself being really interested in intents and DeFi automations. Intents were really fun. So I started to build with the team an Intents protocol, which is launching soon, but we ended up separating for co-founder differences. We wanted to do different things a little bit, but I was not done with my infra explorations. So I spent a couple months, talked with over 35 teams and did a lot of research, and then talked to their investors about even more sentiment. And I turned every stone, and then I got settled on a few protocols that I found really interesting that are really rethinking the paradigm.
Pause real quick. Intense. You keep saying intense, intent infrastructure. What does that mean?
So it's essentially a different kind of, it's like not even blockchain, it's just smart contract infrastructure that lets you automate better. At least that was the most interesting part for me, because a user expresses an intent that they want something to happen, and then smart contracts, computers, and programs find a way to make it happen. So it's a much more straightforward, effective way of executing things on chain and with the chain, off chain and with the chain, based on user requests and what people actually want to do. And it's cheaper, it's faster, and it lets us not do every single click. That right now when you're on chain, you have to do so many clicks yourself, and that doesn't make really a lot of sense. But custody and delegation and the security of that is a big question. But with intents, that is kind of bypassed, and you still reserve all custody of what you have and what you own and all the assets that you're willing to move towards or through an intent machine or an automation system, because the intent space is built in a way, and most of the protocols are built in a way that it only actually executes when all the conditions that you ask for have been met. Very similar to Guild. I don't know if you guys remember me preaching about requirements, roles, and rewards, but it's a very similar pattern of there's rules that you set, you're in control. You set those rules, you want your exact outcome, and it will only execute when that is the exact outcome that you can get. Otherwise, it will never go through. So you will never lose money that way.
That actually makes a lot more sense when you bridge it like that, like why you transitioned from Guild to what you're working on now with Infra, because I think a lot of times like people think of Guild as more of a consumer facing app just because of all the ways that you can use it to build community, and it's like really user focused more so than it's obviously like developers can do a lot with it as well. But as somebody in marketing, as a user of all of these tools, that's just where my head goes to. And so I was curious why you made the jump from Guild to just like deep down the rabbit hole of Infra now. And the way you bridge that makes a lot of sense, because the back end of what Guild was building is the same thing that you're working on now with this intense infrastructure.
Well, that was last year. So since then, I'm in ZK now. So even further down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Okay. So intense. So you spent a year working on intense, speaking to all these teams. Before we get into ZK, actually, I am curious because you spent a whole year researching intense infrastructure and you spoke to over 35 teams that are working on this, which I didn't even know there were 35 teams working on this.
No, that's for my ZK job.
That was for your ZK job. Okay.
The timeline is me doing intense for a year. And the last few months of that, when we knew we weren't going to work together anymore, I really wanted to go further down infra and did a lot of the research and talked to all these teams to see how they're doing things, what they're working on, who's legit, who do I want to spend? Because like we talked about, I cannot do not founder mode, even if I'm working on something that isn't completely mine from the start. I need to be really, really, really invested. So that's how I had all those conversations and then found ZK and my team.
Gotcha. Okay. So then take me down that path of why ZK was the thing that stood out to you after doing research on intense infrastructure for a whole year. Like, what is it about ZK? And then what were some of your learnings about just like where the state of ZK currently is and what the future potential of it is from talking to all these teams?
Okay, let's start with the journey, because I think I'm so happily, okay, disclaimer, I'm nowhere near an expert on ZK. I did spend an awful lot of time on this that I think not a lot of crypto people should spend this much time on it. So maybe this is exactly a perfect POV to simplify a lot of things and explain. So ZK people, don't eat me after this about me being incorrect about math and stuff, but I think there's a very approachable, easier way to explain why ZK is the cool thing right now and why I am so in deep belief on this and why I chose to work on this. So the digging kind of was driven by, I was looking for something that is more than one cycle. It's not just a meme, and it's actually working on why we care about blockchains. And I think I had to go really deep on that. I think why we care about them and what they do is they're essentially a trustless coordination system. And that enables all the, lunar punk, solar punk, whatever dreams you have. But in either way, it increases human efficiency. And that is very interesting to me in general. So that's why I steal crypto. And then in so many ways, somehow like I don't see myself doing like another roll up. Like I feel like I can talk about that issue as well of they're great, but they're solving a different problem and they're creating like 10 more. ZK is a different approach. So why we care about ZK is in a very overview, and then I can go deeper a little bit, is what it allows us to do is decouple consensus and execution and bring it off chain. And I'll say more of what this means and why we care about this is because the aspect of verifiability has come from consensus before, but that is a bottleneck of blockchains really. And every network right now is as slow as its slowest node. So if you keep adding more nodes to the network, it's not getting faster. To solve this, we really needed to start rethinking how we work on this because we just kept making more chains, and that solves some of these issues, but it also fragments liquidity and a lot more other issues that we're then creating other solutions for. And then we're proliferating in a different direction that what accelerates blockchain truly. So yeah, the solution there is that we do have to the attitude there is we have to decouple those processes in blockchain consensus and execution. So ZK helps us with doing that. What ZK is, there's ZK proofs in zero knowledge, and zero knowledge proofs have three main prominent descriptive features that we have to think about. First, why they're called zero knowledge, and the zero knowledge aspect of them is that there's provers and verifiers in zero knowledge, and the prover does not say to the verifier or anyone else that it's interacting with what information it knows. It just shares that it knows. And that information is true because of programmatic, cryptographic, beautiful solutions, math magic. So that's the one aspect. And then there's also soundness, so that the prover can never, even if it doesn't know the information is being asked, it cannot fake the verifier into knowing. That's the soundness. So you can not fake this transaction or information transaction. And there's also completeness, so that the prover actually has the ability to give that information to the verifier. So there's a lot of these, but going back to a little bit bigger picture. So it moves a lot of what the limitations have been for chains, which is execution, which is why there's conversations around proving throughput, increasing throughput, speed of chain. This is why you see all those chains that come up that either increase verticalization, parallelization. Everyone works on execution to make that faster, cheaper, bigger. So how ZK thinks about this is that it moves a lot of the more difficult computations that would fill up a block really fast and make chains go slow and clunky, and puts that off chain. Because right now, every single execution that we do and every single thing that a computer has to math out, and you know how crypto works, it's mostly math. They have to do every single calculation. Every node has to do every calculation again. That goes back to the saying of, if you add another node, it's not going to be faster. So moving that away and creating these proofs, essentially, if you think about it, how I think about it, so it's easier to grasp, is you can prove that you've done that calculation before and it was true. So you don't need to do it again every single time. So you can imagine how much things can scale. If 2 + 2 = 4, you don't have to do that every time when you want to calculate I don't know how much finite calculations and difficult equations. And so ZK's been around for a long time, but what the biggest hindrance for that previously is that the tech wasn't really ready. And the biggest comment on it was that it's not cheap, it's not fast, it's not accessible. And so last year, though, there's quite a few teams that are working on really, really advancing that. And within the last 9 months or 10 months, it became 304 times cheaper than it was before. It's almost close to exactly as cheap as normal on-chain execution, but it's becoming more secure and faster. And adding the three main deliverables of ZK here from all those problems that I talked about before is that adding a new node actually increases throughput. So you can actually scale blockchains way, way bigger. It also adds interoperability, because if I prove with the ZK proof that I've done a calculation, I put that proof back on a chain. Chains can communicate with these proofs. Interoperability through the roof. And then the third aspect, which usually lags behind, and I don't like that it lags behind, but is privacy. And it's because client-side proving will be available really soon, hopefully through these solutions, which just means that a bunch of the computing that you would have to submit to third parties, and there's so many potential violations of privacy in between this sending the information, can be done on your computer or your phone and have the proof and all these things, so that there's even less people and entities involved. So ZK scales blockchain, ZK solves interoperability, and ZK gives privacy. So the things that we thought blockchains are a little bit slow or iffy about, ZK does. Not every single ZK project, but that's the general tendency where it does, is that it solves that.
Yeah, I would love to dive into some examples, because I think that's the easiest way for people to understand how these things play out in real life. And I'll start with one that I heard early on, years ago when I first learned about ZK, and somebody was trying to explain this to me, was, for example, if I'm going to a bar, they need to check my ID to make sure I'm 21. But while I show them my ID, they also get to see my address, where I live. What if the bouncer's a creep and decides to come and stalk me down after the bar? They get to see all this information about me that I don't want them to see and that they don't need to see in order to verify that I'm of age to enter their bar. They only need to see one thing, but they get to see everything. Mm-hmm. And zero knowledge proofs could take that information. It could run it in the back end and say, okay, this Diana Chen is 21. Yes, check mark. And that's all that I would need to show anytime I want to go to a bar and show the bouncer that I'm 21. So that was kind of like a super basic example that was used to explain it to me when I was first learning about it years ago. But I'd love to hear like other examples, whether, with on-chain examples or off-chain real life examples like the one I just gave.
Actually, with the bar example, you don't even have to reveal that you're 21. You can just say, they're asking, are you at least 21? And you just say yes. That's what's
Yeah, exactly. Because maybe I don't want them to know that I'm actually like old.
Exactly. Other examples, like I honestly like the ones that math people teach of like there's a Where's Waldo one, is that there's this Where's Waldo picture and then you like make a cutout and put it over it. Like you try to convince someone that you know where Waldo is and they're like, okay, bet. But then instead of you showing it to them, you put this overlay on top that perfectly shows where Waldo is. And then I don't know, like there's more difficult explanation. I don't think we have to get into that, but I think more on the application side or how this actually becomes usable and fun is what maybe worth talking about here. Because literally what you said example is perfect to say what's your knowledge proofs are, except it gets more complicated the deeper you go with computation. And I kind of feel like I started off on the deep end there with all those examples. So thanks for bringing it back to the more accessible part. So for what we could build with ZK is we can, again, back on it scales, it gives interoperability and it gives privacy. So all the transactions, all the on-chain actions that we're doing right now can be enhanced with that. So for example, you can have exchanges that are ZK. So they're not only, essentially all on-chain applications will have much more output. And right now, for example, you're building a perp. And even that perp, that's a very complicated application actually as a function, you are limited by what fits into a block right now. And because of ZK, you wouldn't. So you can mix in even more features that we never know we needed, but we will. And a very general attitude here is, so every action that we take now will be enhanced by ZK because of scalability, interoperability, and privacy. But all the other things, like we keep talking with our clients and I never know what people will do with this immense more amount, like exponential amount of more computation that we have. And then we keep talking with the clients and every time there's a little bit of an improvement and there's even more computation for them, they fill it out immediately. So the idea is that right now we're here with the amount of computation that we have, essentially on-chain adjacent computation, and it will like exponentially grow in the next year. So we literally don't know because we're at the stage where the internet is just booming, kind of where not even IAM exists yet kind of era with compute. And my team doesn't really like this, but I do believe that with the amount of automations that's happening back to intents, back to AI agents, we will need even more. So not only how AI's infra works, and I don't think a lot of that has to run in ZK at all, but verification of AI's actions, I think will. That's my assumption. And that is also very explosive, as we could see, and a lot of growth. So there's something said about not just on-chain, but I think ZK is the technology that will actually, without us realizing, because it's a very back-end kind of infrastructure, actually will connect Web2 and Web3. And most of the online actions that we take on the internet will be run through ZK.
Do you think ZK is something that every protocol or every on-chain project can benefit from? Because it does seem like nowadays everyone's talking about ZK, wanting to implement ZK. And I'm just wondering if this is real and like every team should actually use ZK, or if this is like back to 2022 DAO peak DAO days when every organization thought they should become a DAO and progressively decentralize into a DAO, and no one thought about like why they needed to do that, and eventually realized that like no, actually we don't need to be a DAO.
Yeah, it's a very valid question. I had the same sus a couple months ago, but even down to the EF, it has revealed Ethereum's roadmap for the next few years, and it's all ZK for a reason. And majority of the teams turn towards some form of ZK on implementing some form of ZK, aside from implementing some form of AI as well. They will get left behind if they don't do it. So the current landscape, some apps right now aren't in the shape that they can immediately integrate ZK, but there are lighter weight solutions that they can use. And there's so many beautiful infrastructure projects in the ZK landscape that are enabling developers with these tooling. So the only hard thing about ZK is the user will so rarely actually feel the difference. They will just feel like the internet is faster and easier. And especially us blockchain people that were used to like slow congestion and failed things, it will just not happen. And so marketing ZK is like really hard because you don't have too many tangible things, but there's a lot of apps also, bridges, exchanges that are already implementing ZK because they will be unlocked, so to speak. They will become boundless this way and much, much faster. And so if, let's say I'm a DEX and I don't even think about implementing and I keep working the same way as I did a year ago, I will be left behind. So currently, let's think about Uniswap. Right now, it's quite an expensive, gas-wise, quite an expensive action to take. And if you're a larger scale operation that does let's say 10 swaps a day, that's not even a lot. I think what the numbers are is I think for a bigger transaction, a bigger, more complex transaction, especially that bridging is involved now too, it's like $7 on mainnet. If you do 10 of that a day, like it's significant.
It adds up.
How much cheaper would that be with implementing ZK?
When you say that for some developers or teams, it's just not possible yet to use ZK, even if they could benefit from it, what do you mean by that? Do you just mean like it's too expensive to implement, or why is it difficult for
I guess
devs?
Just don't know Rust, for example. I don't know.
Okay.
But most of the ZK projects that I know that are pioneering right now are building tech stacks that don't even require you to write circuits anymore, because that was one of the hardships for devs, because it's kind of hard to do that. It was not very accessible, but most projects now allow you to use your own tech stack, use your own code language. You can write in Rust and interact with ZK in Rust, which most blockchain companies, projects use Rust in some way, shape, or form. It is becoming very, very accessible. But I don't know, like some interactions, it's usually in the decision of leadership. That's why I said it, decision of leadership, some of the interactions. So I think it's less straightforward for them to see. Plus, it's a communication issue, I think, from the side of ZK, of seeing how it can actually benefit them in a super easy way for fairly cheap and maybe even one day of development. Because the tech stack for ZK is at the stage where sometimes it takes like a day only to implement these for what an unlock it gives. So
why do you think some leaders aren't sold on ZK yet? Like, are there any trade-offs that are concerning or just like not figured out yet?
I think it's still a communication issue. They're not caught up with ZK being almost as cheap and fast as normal execution patterns. So I think they'll catch up. That's one. And there's one more, is there are concerns, like the tech is just maturing to be super commercially viable and fast and widely adoptable. So some teams just launching their more public versions of their tech stack, but they're working with teams on more private implementation. So I guess that's why this year is the most exciting for ZK, because it's just got to a stage where it is in the position to get widely adopted on multiple parts of the stack.
Working in Web3 for the past 5 years, I've seen firsthand how crucial reliable data is for everything we build. But getting accurate, transparent data on-chain has always been a challenge. That's why I'm excited about Teller. They're revolutionizing how we handle reference prices in crypto by taking a completely decentralized approach to data creation and validation. Teller is not just another Oracle. They built an entire architecture that leverages collective intelligence to ensure the data you're getting is accurate and censorship resistant. If you're building something that needs high quality data you can trust, you need to check out Teller today at teller.io. That's TELLOR.io, or on X at WeAreTeller. Yeah, that is super exciting. And then I also wanted to circle back to like you talking to 35 plus teams over the last year about ZK and stuff, and then ultimately deciding to take a job with RISC Zero. What was it about RISC Zero that stood out to you out of talking to all of these companies that are essentially more or less trying to do the same thing? And then B, just knowing you personally and how I think we're similar in the sense that like you were saying earlier, like you have one speed and it's founder mode, and it's really hard to like tune it down to anything below that, which is same with me, and which is why I've had a hard time working at companies as an employee, because I ultimately like will switch into founder mode and start caring way too much about the project, and eventually like get frustrated that I care more about the project than the people even the founders. So what was it, I'm curious, about RISC Zero that made you like, that stood out in the ZK space, and then that also made you personally like want to commit to actually taking a job there?
So the teams that I talked with, for the record, weren't only ZK. They were also alternative protocols and some layer ones and some rollups that were thinking a little bit differently about scaling what we have, because that's what I cared about mostly. But why I really quickly narrowed it down to a few companies, and one of them was RISC Zero. And well, really quickly means like 2 months, but I'm a cautious cat, so that seems quick. I just kept talking with these teams, and I honestly took our first call with RISC Zero out of, I know they're investors. They've been around for a few years. They're really like consistently there just doing something. I knew they're really prominent in ZK, which is why I cared about them. But I literally took the call of like, okay, let's just see. And then every single call we had, it was just more and more convincing. They're really, really charmed me with their consistency. So not only in terms of their quality of work and their attitude and what they ship and how they think about the industry, but just as people. Like I've talked to a lot of teams, and they had the most consistent culture and vibe in terms of how they work with each other, how their attitude towards work and crypto and life. So that was very, very appealing to me, aside from being top tier team and tech reputably for years. And they keep shipping it. And the founders this isn't their first rodeo, which was also exciting to me because I mostly, build my own spaceships or work with super early stage things. And this, mind you, it's still a startup, but at least they've done this before in huge Web2 companies. And most of the teams an insane, like star-studded, but like more in, like from Amazon, Coinbase, like all the things you want, it's there. So the experience and expertise is also really, really interesting because I wanted to learn more seniority and what they're shipping, because I didn't know they're building Boundless, which is the project I'm on within RISC Zero. It's just launching soon. It's a protocol. We can talk more about that later if you want, but it really got me because it does all the things that I wanted, which is it's a very revolutionary way of very openly and proactively and open sourcely bringing ZK to other chains. So not creating another L1 or L2 where you like make people bridge to your chain, hoard all the moat that way. I didn't like that. This is not like that. And this was the only one that did that. I like that attitude. I think it's much more building towards the future that I would like to enable. And also excellent tech. It's excellent tech. It's good. I'm excited.
So is Boundless like a bridge? Is it like building a bridge, or is it more of like a communications channel that's just educating people?
No, Boundless is a whole protocol. So
it's a whole protocol. Okay.
Has built the first general purpose ZKVM and a few more products around the ZKVM that teams have been utilizing to build ZK on their own. Most people have forked initially in 2021, have forked their original open source code. So they've really been in it. And Boundless is their essentially protocol approach to bringing that to every chain. So it's for overview technical purposes from really high level. It's a bunch of smart contracts. It's a lot of cryptography, and it's some off-chain infrastructure. And at its core, there's a marketplace for compute, which is why verifiable compute, and we can talk about the varies later, but there's essentially provers on one side and then demand generating apps, rollups, bridges on the other side. And then it's part of a whole stack of extensions and other partners, other prover networks building up as part of Boundless. So we're generating proofs that come from essentially any blockchain app or blockchain itself. And then it goes and settles back on any requested blockchain, inheriting its security.
Wow. That's awesome. By the way, is that where the berry meme comes from? Like verifiable compute.
And, like I've been a berry for like over a year. So me joining the team as my first order of business, I'm going to verify everybody. No, that's not how it happened. But yeah, if you hear verifiable compute, isn't verifiable the first thing you hear aside from that? Because for me, it definitely was. But on a level, ZK really needs to get off its high horse, in my opinion. Whenever I told any friend of mine that I'm really interested in it and I'm going to work in it, they were like, In my experience, people zone out when you talk about ZK. And I don't like that as a person who's interested in distribution and growing things and making people care about things. I don't like that. So I really wanted something that is relevant. It relates to it, but it's much sweeter. And it gives me a lot of analogies and visual content to explain ZK and how these infrastructure pieces work without talking about infrastructure directly, which is a blessing.
It's so smart. I think honestly, like take any object, like especially like a cute thing and meme it. Like that's the way to do it. And that's also, I feel like that's something that you do really well. You did well at Guild as well. And just like in general, you do really well is memeing things into like explaining hard to understand concepts in a simple way via memes and cute things like berries. So I'm curious.
Sorry.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I did a terrible job in the opening here talking about ZK. I just jumped into the middle of it. I could have done the overview and stuff.
You should have done the whole berry thing that you do to people.
I should have started with the berries. It's a great opener too.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, you need to get like a berry hat or something, and just like full send on the berry meme. But I wanted to ask you too about just like your marketing strategy and especially your GTM strategy for a protocol, since that's what you're working on now. When you think about building out and executing a GTM strategy for a protocol, how do you think about that differently from, for example, doing GTM for like a traditional product?
It's harder and easier. It's easier because in crypto, you're building a protocol. People speculate much easier. And just mentioned testnet in a tweet and you get like 40,000 impressions just of that tweet because you mentioned testnet somewhere. So there's that. It's easier that way. People like know what to do. They're ready. You just have to tell them what to do and they're ready. They're ready to do the things you want them to do, which is great and exciting. It's much, much less cold start problem than building a more consumer facing or traditional product when you're carving your way out because people get it. Like they know what they're here for. But on the other note, to create the other side of that, of actually building out marketing that's interesting and it teaches people something and it is a successful TG is much more than some like stake here or bridge here, especially that this is a protocol. It's not a chain. So thinking about it, it's really fun. More on the like hardship side or challenges / what I'm working on a lot is this is more of an ecosystem of ecosystems. So I don't have the toolkit in my hand to, again, like do the bridging, lock in money, grow TVL. All those things are not really relevant here. So what I have to really focus on and do is showcase us as an ecosystem of ecosystems being this core infrastructure piece and not only get our message through and our vision through testnet, through going towards mainnet, but essentially create a whole new economy as well. Because yes, we're this enabling infrastructure piece for other ecosystems and chains and apps. But at the same time, on top of the marketplace, we're actually building on verifiable compute. There's a legit opportunity to build whole new financial applications, which is super interesting because no one's done that before. So I'm very excited of building that out later. But for right now, I have to really do left curve and right curve at the same time, which bless the berries. They're really helping me with that, especially like just having something tangible. Great idea. And you will laugh. This is February 5th right now. I came up with the idea of the berries January 7th. So that was the first time I texted one of my friends of like, hey, I should have like an NFT project or something that's verifiable compute and like has berries in it. Until launch, which was earlier this week, was less than 4 weeks. So there's challenges. It's harder. It's easier. Really hard that there isn't as tangible. So the aspect around really supporting your ecosystem and the developers that are using your technology and working really closely with them and finding as many ways as possible to enable them as builders and showcase them and highlight them is core. And I focus a lot on that while making ZK more approachable, more understandable, communicating our vision and our mission, what we are here to do and get people excited about it, and also give them something to do, and also build out a whole new financial market, and also maybe even think about building our own applications on top of it to showcase even more of the consumer-facing greatness that it will enable. So it's a lot more layered, but at the same time, the speculations makes things a little bit easier. Sometimes funding's easier than building starting from zero with a consumer product. I've seen so many of my friends struggle with that. I've been there also. So it's easier and harder.
Yeah, I hear you. One thing that always struck me as pretty challenging for a protocol when we think about like GTM for a protocol is how to balance the developer adoption and, catering to your developers and getting developers to build in your ecosystem versus that end user growth. And I think about this a lot in the context of decentralized social with Lens versus Farcaster, where I think Farcaster really went heavy on that developer adoption side of the spectrum. And then Lens went way heavier on the end user growth. And I don't really know if there's a right or a wrong approach, but I'm just curious to hear how you think about balancing those two, whether it's, I think I don't know if you saw Bram's post on Twitter recently about marketing. And I think the way he thinks about it is like the balance of that shifts as as a protocol grows over time. I don't know if that's how you think about it. But I just love to hear your perspective on that.
I did not see that post, but I get it. And I think I have it saved for reading later. I don't know. I remember it. It almost feels like it changes month to month based on what you're focused on. And we're at the interesting stage, or people are usually at the interesting stage when you're both researching, strategizing, planning, and executing at the same time, especially that we're a small team. And then it's like a fluctuation between the two. I used to talk a lot about growth cycles and then consolidation cycles in terms of audiences and communities. And I think it's really the same here is you have to pick your winners, I think. Be open of who enters, but then who actually enters, you should support them as much as you can in your ecosystem and be very proactive about it. That's an always approach. But at the same time, I think you do have to pay a lot of attention on the other side of things. So like the more, how you phrased it, social or consumer facing?
And like end user growth. Yeah, so the end user.
I currently at our stage, super early, I prioritize the developers, and our ecosystem, because it's so early. Like we need things to even give to people, So it's much more for that. But we also at the same time have to do education. And at the same time, we have to make people excited. And it's a kind of a weird market. I don't know if it would call it bull market, but there's pumping going on. So with eventual dips, but there's pumping going on. So attention is even more scarce than usually. So you really do have to emphasize the vision and the culture that you're building and really uplift your community and your ecosystem. I think it's always a good strategy, and especially this early and with these phases, absolutely.
I also want to just hear a little bit more about your strategy around I know we've talked about like memeing the berries into existence and using that as a tool to educate about ZK as well. But if you can break down that whole process in your brain a little more for people, like how can people get started with getting those early adopters and really getting not just early adopters, but almost evangelists or this cult following where people are just like Kashvi in the chat is like, berries will take over. And, everybody on Twitter is like, berries, berries, berries. Like, how do you build up this army of people behind you from day one? What is like the tangible process if you were to coach somebody else into doing it? How would you explain it to them?
It's really interesting because I think so many things go into it. Like it came up with it less than a month ago. But everything else that I have in my toolkit, it's something that I've been growing for 5 years at this point. So it's not like an overnight thing, even though it might look like some of it. What I would give as tips though, is I'm a person who focuses a lot on my relationships, and it takes an awful lot of time. And people always tell me that they don't have time. You have the time. You just don't want it enough. And care. It goes so long. There's other approaches. You can totally go the rage bait direction. I personally cannot do that. That also works for other people who are more open to that path. I just can't. I'm not cut out of that strong wood.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
So for me, it's honestly, you have to make people care and make them excited, whatever tools you have. So for me, I think I'm really good at building my relationships and getting people excited about what I'm excited about. I think it's contagious. So that works, but it's not scalable. So that's what you have to figure out, how you scale it across timelines, across platforms, across groups. And it doesn't just scale with you having a team and a larger team. It scales by you creating a bigger mission than yourself and making a larger community excited about it is much easier than you having to sit and chat with everyone and make them excited about your personal reasons. So for me, how I think about it is it comes from person, but it also at the same time, it comes from, so person's here and the other end is big, huge mission, way bigger than it should be. And it's like unrealistically huge, but that's what people will care about if they don't even know you. And that's what they'll align with. And you have to meet these two in the middle. Plus you have to put in an insane amount of work hours and honestly get practice under your belt as well with both of these strategies. Building out both is different, but at the middle is going to be where you'll find success.
Do you think it's more effective to focus on providing value through things like technical education about ZK, for example? Or do you think it's more effective to really be providing the vibes and bringing people in through that?
I think it depends on your positioning and how you have decided to position your company and your project. If it's a kind of you're creating a new environment, a new narrative, you'd have to do an awful lot of education. You don't have no other choice. But every other time you have to pick the vibes. So if you're another layer too, like there's only so much technical difference that you're actually providing, like very little usually. So you don't have to do that all that much. But what you do need to do is be different, be memorable, be exciting, be align people with your mission and your bigger things. So if you choose to position yourself as a different player in an existing ecosystem or an existing narrative shape, you do have to lean heavier on the vibes. If you're creating a new category or if you're connecting to that didn't exist before and you brand something new on top of it and you position yourself as the leader of that and the starter, much more education. But something as hardcore as, deep infrastructure, you end up having to do somewhat of a educational route. But for hopefully where ZK Tech specifically goes is that less and less education is required because it's going to be so easy to use for developers who already know how to code and know what they want to build that it's not going to be as heavy of a steep curve. So I like educational content. I think you can make it really fun and make education meet with vibes really well. I like doing those types of content pieces and building messaging strategies around that. But yeah, these are the two differentiations. So it comes from your positioning.
Yeah, for sure. And Kashvi also in the chat is saying providing value is number one. Vibes are the result of genuinely valuable value. So there is, and I think I agree with that. And I think the best case scenario is if you're able to sort of mesh the two, like you've said, right? Like to provide education about technical things like ZK through berries.
Exactly. You have to left curve and right curve it at the same time.
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
where magic happens.
Yeah. Do you think that like the way that you see GTM, everything that you talked about in the last, 20 minutes or so, do you think any of that changes in a bear market versus a bull market?
I think it's different attention somehow. Sentiment is different. So for example, how you position yourself and what narrative you're taking will be different in a bear market than in a bull market. And how you communicate as a team and how you show up as a team will be also different a little bit. I would say bull market, it's like if you think you're doing something crazy, you have to add like 20% on top of that. You're not being crazy enough. That's
so true.
We're disconnected.
Yeah. And then in a bear market, how do you keep the vibes up?
Yeah, that's harder. But I honestly really, really like the bear market vibes. It's so small and so much more. That's where you build your core support. So I think protocols that have timed or even chains that have timed themselves to build through the bear, they have such more of a strong community because people actually really, really wanted to be here, much less price speculations going on. I think from a perspective, you would lean even heavier into cultivating community in a bear market than you would in a bull. You can rely on community much heavier than in a bull market type of arena where tensions are high, prices go crazy. There's a lot of TGs happening left and right. There's airdrops everywhere. People can't even keep track of all the airdrops. By the way, why don't we have better tooling for that still? Like, how do I not know? Why don't my friends have to send me the airdrops that I might be able to claim? It's crazy.
Do you use Daylight?
Yeah, it's not all of them. I also use Boundless as a query page where you can see if you missed any, but it's not, there's things that fall through the cracks.
last thing, I want to save some time to get through some of our Twitter questions because we had a lot of questions from the community there. So I'm just opening up the list right now. People want to know about the berries. Humpty just hopped in the chat and is asking what he missed about the berries. We had some questions on Twitter about the berries. Ernest came in right away with how did she get everyone to change their PFP because I'm having double takes now with all the berry PFPs. So we talked about some of that. I do actually want to hear your just like very quick, very abridged spiel about using berries to explain what ZK is.
I'm going to say very few words on it. I also don't want to spoil all my stuff for later. Essentially, how I started to think about it, first of all, the words make sense. So verifiable compute. And then how logically it makes sense is a berry is a proof. Hold on. And then the proofs need to go to the market. And then at the market, there's other berries. And every berry is a little bit individual because they're made out of these droplets. So they're unique berries and they need to be auctioned off to the best buyer. There's also farmers who provide the berries. So there's an analogy here that I'm going to play a lot into, but also, verifiable compute, verification. There's so many things it can mean with berry. It's huge. And boundless berries just rolls off the tongue. It's so nice and easy.
Oh, I like that. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I love a good alliteration.
And I love consistency and I love unification and I love people supporting each other. And I think it's a very visible way without creating like a full NFT drop out of the gate in like 2 weeks to unify. And yeah, I'm going to unify more of the feed. So stay tuned for that. But more people are going to be berries and they're going to love it because it's really cute. And we're going to make it a little bit of a thing. And then when people find it annoying, we'll make it a little more of a thing and then we'll pivot or we'll keep going forever. Maybe, I don't know. But on how I made the team berries for Ernest question, honestly, I thought very genuinely what I've heard from doing a lot of research about this team is they had excellent talent before me, like years ago. And the criticism that I heard about them is that they're so good at tech. They're so good at shipping. They're like such good people. They just never leaned into marketing enough. And I was like, if that's the public perception, let me change that like immediately.
Yeah.
So it just made sense that they're so sweet. And they were really, it took me a couple conversations to get there by. And they were like, my CEO was like, I don't get it, but it's cute. I don't have a problem with it. I trust you. Let's go. So I was like, I'll do it. And then everyone was in. It's also something I needed to get them more excited about being online. And this kind of sparked joy within the team, within our community. And that's all I wanted is for people to feel happy to be online. Because I think the timeline's in shambles. Like there's so much fun going on and it's gross. So, you know me, I needed to bring some light and wholesomeness to it. And I think that succeeded. So on to the next challenge right now. But they're really with it. I'm so surprised. Actually, I was very pleased.
I love it. I can just picture the conversation happening of like you trying to pitch these really technical, deep technical people about like, hey, but hear me out.
Exactly.
Berries.
Was like, so here's the pitch. We're going to do boundless berries.
We're all going to be berries.
We're all going to be berries. We're going to talk about verifiable compute and we're going to verify our friends and we're going to unite as a front to help the internet be more ZK and berry. And
I'm excited for where this narrative goes. I hope it becomes this whole thing where like people can get roles, they can become farmers, they can become auctioneers, they can become buyers, they can be all parts of this berry process, this very, very cute process.
It's silly enough because ZK is so it's science. I don't know.
It's scary. It's like intimidating to people. And so by taking it down to berries, you're making it a lot more accessible.
Contrast is a lovely thing. People love contrast.
And another question about berries from Twitter. This is from Salama. which berries are the best and why raspberries? Are
For
you berry
eating?
agnostic or are you a
No.
raspberry maxi?
I'm a raspberry maxi. For
Ooh,
eating,
okay.
actually, I'm a blueberry maxi, but for all intents and purposes, raspberries are the best for the internet.
For the internet. Are we going to leave it at that or do you want to say
Sure.
more?
I guess just a quick note is we pitched a lot of ZK today, but I would just like to implore everybody to keep building things you believe in and not just what makes you money now, because the things you believe in will also make you money, because this is crypto and we make it work that way. So don't forget that too, not just for personal quick, like do bigger things, think bigger, think bigger and build bigger and be boundless.
Be boundless. Tell people where they can go to keep up with you on the internet and also where people can go to learn more about Boundless.
I'm mostly active on Reka _East on Twitter, and Boundless is Boundless_XYZ. It looks like a berry now. I'll fix the logo soon, but I wanted to make it a berry without fully ruining its shape. So it's a little bit of a berry now too. Oh, amazing. And if you come to my event, it's going to be beautiful. It's denver.beboundless.xyz.
Do you want to say something about it? What kind of event is it? I'm excited.
We're unveiling more of Boundless and our partners and who we're working with and how it works. And there's going to be a chess match and there's going to be a lot more things. And it's not a hotel lobby kind of, it's beautiful. And my team's amazing. And I've been creative directing it. And it doesn't feel like a crypto event. That's all I have to say.
Okay. I can't wait. Say the URL again.
Denver.beboundless.xyz.
Okay. Perfect. I will go check that out. I'll include all the links in the show notes to make it easy for people to click through. And thank you, Reka, for coming back on. This was so much fun. I learned so much. I cannot wait to keep following the berry narrative and learning more about ZK from you and just to see where ZK goes in the future. So thanks for taking the time to come back on again. Thanks for sharing your infinite wisdom and fun memes and vibes with us. And we'll hopefully talk to you soon back on Rehash again in another year or two.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for everyone again for voting me in and having me pitch ZK to you so heavy. And berries.
Go berries.
Go berries.
Thanks again so much, Reka. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And we'll be back again next week with another episode of Rehash. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted and produced by me, Diana Chen, and supported by our community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes part of the Rehash community and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at rehashweb3 or on Warpcast and Lens at Rehash, and join our community on Telegram at t.me/rehashweb3 to hash it out with fellow listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time.